Normally at this point of a Grand Prix weekend, I spend quite a lot of time talking to everybody about very small new parts of racing cars that have been introduced up and down the pit lane. These upgrades make all of the difference as a season goes on if they work, and make no difference whatsoever or even negative if they don't work. But the biggest upgrade I want to talk about at the Qatar Grand Prix, the first upgrade I want to talk about at least, is on the McLaren. Well, it's not actually on the McLaren at all, it's back at the McLaren factory. McLaren has introduced a brand new state-of-the-art wind tunnel, and the team hope it's going to raise their performance to an even higher level than the team are at right now. So to introduce that new wind tunnel, I think the best thing to do is let Will Buxton have a quick chat with the team boss, Andrea Stella.
The upgrades that we have put on this year's car, including the Singapore upgrades, they were all developed at the Toyota wind tunnel. So we started testing in the new wind tunnel only with the new car for next year. So everything we see here has been developed in that wind tunnel, and obviously has been developed in the CFD computer simulation. So let's say we are happy with the correlation we have in terms of development tools and what we have here trackside. The early runs in the new MTC wind tunnel with the new car, they have also been encouraging in terms of correlation with our CFD expectation, and also with what we could see with some models that we used as a test, testing in both environments to see how well they were correlating. Even in this case, we found good results. So I think we are in a good place from a development methodology point of view.
Well, that's really interesting to hear, because McLaren have been doing a great job using that wind tunnel at the Toyota factory in Germany. We've seen McLaren make the biggest steps forwards of any team in terms of performance all year long. And they've come up with the same, and it's very much a trend this year, of the deeply dished side pods. The car didn't start out like that. It started out very Red Bullish, but they've taken inspiration, shall we say, from Alpine and Aston Martin with that deep dished side pod concept. But the thing about wind tunnels, as you heard Andrea Stella explaining, a lot of it's to do with correlation. And I'm going to explain what that means in just a moment. But the first thing I want to point out is that a newer wind tunnel is not necessarily better. Let's not forget, the team at the front of the field has pretty much dominated this season all year long, and dominated last season, Red Bull Racing. Well, Red Bull used the oldest wind tunnel in Formula One by an enormous margin. The Red Bull wind tunnel was first built 75 years ago by the British military in order to improve aircraft design. Well, that's worked pretty well for them. Red Bull do want a new wind tunnel, but currently their new design is going through the British planning system, and I know quite well that that takes quite a long time to get through. But even with a new wind tunnel up and running, a team has to go through that process called correlation. And what that means is getting the wind tunnel to spit out results that have the same margin of error consistently to CFD, the virtual wind tunnel, where the computer simulates what airflows are going to be doing. And then you have to get both of those techniques working with what the real car is actually doing out on track. That's where you see all of those wall tufts and flow visualization techniques being used on the cars. We'll see Albert Fabrica talking about that all soon and how that all works. And that's all to do with bringing together those results from the racetrack, the CFD and the wind tunnel together. So what McLaren's new wind tunnel is really going to mean for the team is those developments that they've brought through for this car using the old Toyota wind tunnel, they're still going to be able to bring lots of different developments together once they get that correlation sorted, and that's a continual process for every single team on the grid, and it'll make their development more efficient. So what might have taken them 1 or 2 weeks to develop, they might be able to do in 3 or 4 days, and their engineers won't have to hop on an aeroplane and fly from Woking to Cologne in Germany, and that's going to be a cost saving for the team as well. But all of these different wind tunnel parts that get spat out through the season bring different levels of results. And we can see up and down the field here in Qatar, different teams are developing their cars at different paces. Let's start with Alpine, because they've bought quite a lot of interesting parts to their car, largely in preparation for the Mexican Grand Prix. Well, Alpine's wind tunnel first opened in 1998 as the Benetton wind tunnel. The team's gone through many changes of identity since then, from Renault to Lotus Renault. And back to Alpine at the end of it. Well, they've changed some of the cooling outlets at the rear of the car, these little triangular sections on the spine of Pierre Gasly's car. And note that little slit just in the centre line of the car, just to let some of the hot air out of underneath the bodywork. These developments are all largely aimed at the Mexican Grand Prix, where you have that high altitude, and cooling the cars with a lot less flow through the side pods is hard to do. And you can see the car is running in an asymmetric cooling configuration. There's coolers opened up on the cooling louvres opened up on the right-hand side pod, but to reduce drag on the left-hand side of the car, no cooling louvers there at all. And that's because underneath the bodywork, the car's not actually symmetric. There's different coolers for different things. The ERS cooler might be on one side, the water air cooler might be on the other side. You've got different things around underneath the bodywork. So they're just trying to get the best performance in terms of downforce and drag for high temperature running. So they're experimenting, taking the advantage of running in Qatar in the high temperatures to experiment to get the best solution for the Mexican Grand Prix later in the season. But while looking at the cooling apertures on the car, I noticed something quite interesting just underneath the rear wing support on the Alpine. Now, I think they've had this for a few races, but it's the first time we really talked about it. You might hear strange words from people like Craig Scarborough, such as things like monkey seats, and those were the strangely named winglets that sat above the exhaust in the previous generation of cars. But have a look here. You can see there's this interesting hooped section just over the exhaust on the back of the Alpine. Get a slightly clearer view of it here. And I think this is a really beautiful little piece of engineering. It's just worth highlighting. You can see this section, this winglet sitting above, they call it a wylon, this big arch section that supports the rear wing over the exhaust tailpipe, which must be located in the centre of the car by regulation to stop people having blown diffusers and all sorts of things like that. And you can see this winglet, and it is a winglet, running over the back of that section. And you can see the wing section just here like that with little tiny end plates on it. Very neat design, lovely little bit of engineering there from the team, better than my line drawing certainly there was. Now this will generate a little bit of downforce directly into that rear wing support, but I mean we're talking a part that's only a few centimetres big. It's not going to have an enormous effect, but what it might have a bigger effect on is what the air around this section is doing, because you can see the shape of the rear wing support here, trying to reduce drag around that pylon that they have to have. The DRS actuator runs up through the middle of that as well, and just try to reduce the drag of that part, but at the same time trying to get every tiny little piece of downforce out of the design of the car. Lovely engineering there from Alpine. And it doesn't just stop there. We talked about the cooling earlier on. They've opened up the cooling section at the back of the car much wider. That's again an experiment for Mexico. When the lights go out in Qatar, I think they're going to close up that bodywork a little bit and try and reduce the drag a little bit more. You can see those triangular sections we were looking at just at the start a little bit more closely here, and you can see where that section with the little winglet sits in context there a little bit clearer. So nice design there from Alpine. And the work underneath the car continues as well. Alpine have just been mucking about with this little cutout on the wall, the side wall of the diffuser. All the teams have a little cutout sort of here, and it just gets the tyre squirt doing what they want. So the little vortexes that come off the bottom of the tyre here, well, they're just trying to control that, trying to almost seal the sides of the floor a little bit, generate a bit more downforce, using lessons learned over decades of Formula One engineering. So really nice little solutions underneath the Alpine. Alfa Romeo have also been playing around at the rear and on the underside of their car, and they've been playing with the beam wings. Now this is an area that every team's been developing up and down the field all year long. This generation of car, you can get a lot of benefit out of playing with those wings without a lot of cost cap implications. Making a small aerodynamic part like that is a lot cheaper than making a whole new rear wing section. But Alfa Romeo have done more than just the beam wing. Now, these shots at the rear of the car, we see them all the time. We see the beam wings. Sometimes they're double deck, sometimes they're single deck, sometimes you see little arch designs. That's all different, and you see those iterations going through the season. But looking at the rear wing end plate from this angle, we can start to see that they've actually had a little bit of a play around on the leading edge of the rear wing end plate. Now, they've had this lumped section for some time here, but you can just see it here, how it almost comes down like a Batman wing almost on the leading edge. It's a really nice design. Again, a little bit of stealth fighter maybe in there as well. But I don't think they're going for a low radar cross section with the way the rear wing end plates look. It's just another little iteration of design. The Alfa Romeo team, of course, used the Sauber Motorsport wind tunnel in Hinwil in Switzerland, a tunnel that is very famous because it developed all of those Le Mans winning Audi cars, and it will be developing, of course, the 2026 Audi Formula One car. But it was also the wind tunnel that the FIA and Formula One used to develop this current set of rules for all of the teams to use. And I think that wind tunnel is also being used to develop the 2026 regulations. So quite an important wind tunnel, very well regarded. And it was built in, I think it was opened about 2005, 2006 sort of time, with some funding from BMW of all people at that point. Well, one of the teams that do not have their own wind tunnel, well, they do have their own wind tunnel, but they choose not to use it, is AlphaTauri. They use the Red Bull wind tunnel, that 75-year-old museum piece that's soon to be replaced if Red Bull get that planning permission. Well, AlphaTauri, they've been struggling with the aerodynamic performance of their car all year long. They're going to take a very different direction next year, we know that already. But they've been playing around with the edge of the floor, which is seemingly a never-ending process. I just really like this camera angle because you can see this big hump at the leading edge of the floor, which is really quite distinctive on that AlphaTauri design. Houses the lower side impact structure, and then looking from this angle you can really see you can see the sculpting on the bodywork, but you can really see how that floor edge changes profile along the side of the car. Now, some of those lumps and bumps are to house components. As I say, you can see the lower side impact structure housed in this big bump here, but some of it is, and most of it, frankly, is purely for aerodynamic purposes. Huge amounts of work going on up and down the field on floor designs. And some of it, I suspect, is not just on the AlphaTauri, up and down the field. Some of it is to do with a technical directive that was issued not all that long ago, came into force for the Singapore Grand Prix, but most of it is all to do with just getting the most aerodynamic performance out of all of these cars, and all of that performance is developed in CFD, on track, and of course in the various wind tunnels that are used up and down the field.